Welcome to the Indigenous Entrepreneurs Podcast. Today I have James Reede with me. James is an entrepreneur, a veteran, and he works with Hesperus, who's our partner for the Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. But before we get into all of that, James, if I could just have you introduce yourself, who you are and where you come from.
So, good morning, everybody. My name is James Reede. I come from the San Carlos Apache tribe in southeastern Arizona. I am a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, where I served 8 years and discharged honorably. I served as a communication specialist and a marksmanship instructor. During my time, I served 3 consecutive tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Um, After being discharged, I came back here to the reservation where I do currently reside with my wife and children, and we are actively engaged, in the development of our children. I do coach community services such as baseball, football, basketball with the kids, and just make sure that they are positively engaged and have safe activities. Um, As far as Hesperus, I serve as the operations manager. I'm responsible for outreach and engagement for our programs for Native American veterans, as well as other youth programs that we do provide throughout the different reservations and communities in the Southwest region, as well as up into Alaska with the Alaska Natives. We have a huge footprint, I guess you can say, that we are trying to create and establish in regards to creating opportunities for Native American veterans and tribal youths.
James and I met a few years ago. I think you were just starting, or you'd been working with Hesperus a little bit, but not as the operations manager yet, I don't think, when we met. And we really got to know each other when you actually went through the Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that experience, why you decided to participate, and what it was like for you. Seeing things as like from a participant and entrepreneur perspective versus just like creating the program.
Yeah, Cecilia, we did meet probably about 3, 4 years ago now, going on 4 years, and that was through Hesperus, and doing a lot of outreach and engagement at that time, um, which led me to becoming a participant in the Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans, for different reasons, different facets, especially within my role. I needed to know and understand what EBV provided for our veterans, a lot of the intricacies of the program, and how I was able to do more successful recruiting and vetting with our participants. But it also had me kind of look at opportunities that I've had, personally, as an entrepreneur. Everybody talks about having, the entrepreneur spirit and, things that we do to create money or side hustle, like some people may talk about. And knowing and understanding how small businesses work, helped me to be a little bit more successful, or even to help me realize what I was doing wrong, why I wasn't successful in certain areas. uh, One of the side hustles per se that we did have is a big game guiding, for hunting or fishing, camping and recreation. Especially out here on the reservation, it's some of the activities do require a licensed tribal member guide for our non-members to come on the reservation, and being able to share, my knowledge of the reservation, different areas, and of the game management programs that the tribe does have, was allowed me to, utilize that as a potential business. There are other individuals out here that do or that have a successful guiding business. And it got to a question of a market flood, and I didn't know what that was. A saturation of the market, I guess you can say. But during my time during the EBV, a lot of the presenters spoke on, those topics, and it helped a lot of people understand, helped me understand, what that meant and how to navigate, a saturated market. What would help me be a better business? Why could I be better in what I do or in the services that I provide? During my time at EBV, I found out that there were other Native American veteran entrepreneurs that have had that problem, depending on the business that they had, the services that they provided, or the products, that they were trying to sell. And going through the EBV, a lot of the mentors, a lot of the tribal liaisons, helped us to understand, that's just part of growing, in the business. Those are growing pains, and to adapt, and overcome and endure those hardships or those challenges, and which can make your business stronger, makes your product better, and makes your services, more unique.
Just to provide some context for people listening, the EBV, so I mentioned the Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans. UNM Rainforest Innovations partners with Hesperus for this program. And this will be our fourth year doing it. It'll be our fourth cohort. And the way it's structured is people apply. You have to be a Native American veteran. There's phase one, which is online, and then there's phase two, which is a 1 week in-person boot camp of like different topics, trainings, seminars. There's a reception, and so that's phase two in person in Albuquerque. And then phase three is like ongoing support and networking for the alumni. So that's the program that James is referring to when he says EBV, and he went through the whole thing and participated. So he has the perspective now of like working with Hesperus and helping put on the program, but he also went through the program, so he really can serve as like a great resource for participants. Um, I think my next question for you, James, is like during your experience with EBNAV and just or EBV, we call it all different things. But with your experience, like with learning about the entrepreneurship side of things and then your own experience as an entrepreneur, um, what are some skills or are there skills, I guess you could say, that kind of transfer from the military into like entrepreneurship, that you think make veterans in particular good candidates to like start their own business?
Well, thank you, Cecilia. I know I kind of jumped the gun and jumped ahead there for a moment. Going through EBNAV, Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American Veterans, um, and utilizing or thinking back and understanding the foundation that was instilled in not only myself but other veterans of leadership, of being self-sufficient, um, different principles, that had to apply, especially if you were in a particular position in the military where you had responsibility, over people or equipment or other projects. It really helped develop a sense of ownership a sense of accountability. You had to have proper judgments. You had to have certain areas of expertise, or in the Marine Corps, they tell us one of the leadership principles is to know yourself, and to seek self-improvement. Know your strength, know your limitations, know your capabilities, and however you're able to do so, how are you going to reinforce that? What more education, what more continuing education do you need to make sure you are successful to fulfill your role, and be successful in the mission accomplishment? Employing your team, according to their capabilities, is one thing that may help entrepreneurs if once they create their business, and they start to bring on employees, to help them run the operation. As most entrepreneurs know, small business owners, you serve many different positions, in that business. You're not only the manager, you're the CEO, you're the financial officer, you are HR, you're the driver, you're your own publisher. So you have to serve in different capacities. And that's where you need to know and understand, what my limitations are. What can I do good, and what am I not doing great, and how can I be better? Um, Keeping your employees or your team informed, sharing information with those around you. Uh, we know as an entrepreneur, sometimes you're going to be by yourself. You're going to be alone. You're going to be the sole man that other people will rely on you. Your family, your family are going to sacrifice from your time and your commitment, because of your focus and energy is going to be on your business. But as long as you're able to communicate effectively with your family and let them know, what you're doing and why you're doing it, especially knowing the why. A lot of people forget to answer the question why. Why am I doing this? And why should I, communicate my business? Why should I communicate my plans, with your family, with those people that you trust? If you have a confidant that you can rely on, usually your spouse. Your spouse is going to be your number one supporter in everything that you do. Those are some principles, I believe, and other traits that are taught in the military or that are instilled into you, such as time management, being where you need to be at the appropriate place and time ahead of time, so you're not late, you're meeting deadlines, um, being being honest. I think being honest with yourself, being honest with your customers, having, like I said, having the right judgment, mm, initiative, having a lot of initiative, especially in entrepreneurship. You are your own boss, you are your own employee, and you have to go out every day to make things happen. And no one's going to push you except for yourself. Those might be a few, things that I can touch upon.
Yeah, I think, at least from my observation, I feel like there are a lot of skills like that you mentioned that transfer from being in the military to being an entrepreneur, which I think sets veterans specifically up really well to pursue entrepreneurship as like some as a potential path for them after they get out of the military.
And
Um,
just to answer some more of those questions,
mhm.
you when you're in the military, you have a sense of purpose. You have a mission to accomplish. You still have that drive, you have that energy, and when you are discharged, you're still going to carry a lot of those principles, and that do focus on your competence, of your skills, especially your character. You want to take care of people. You're used to taking care of people. Um, You're used to taking care of equipment. You're a lot of high value equipment as well, really, really sensitive equipment. And, set the example, the example for those around you, people that watch you, they may want to emulate, how you operate, how you carry yourself, being able to be technically proficient, in your skill, making sound decisions, um, understanding and being able to supervise the tasks that are at hand. Once we leave the military, a lot of these things kind of just get pushed to the wayside to where we feel that we don't have a purpose anymore. So that's where I believe entrepreneurship is a great opportunity for veterans, to recreate that sense of purpose, recreate that sense of responsibility, to seek responsibility and to take responsibility. Um, and it also helps you to rebrand yourself. All right. There's a transition phase that a lot of us do go through, and it's like a rebirth, but you still have a lot of these skills and principles that have been hardwired into you that will allow you to survive and to continue to be successful. I just thought I'd share that other part.
Oh, that's good. I agree. I think veterans make the perfect candidate for entrepreneurs for a lot of different reasons. Would you say that there's anything specifically that would make a Native American entrepreneur or a Native American veteran even a better candidate for entrepreneurship? Because it's like veterans bring in a whole set of skills and things, but then I think you put native like the Native American background into that as well, and like it's this whole other set of skills and values. I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on that if you have any.
Absolutely. To be an entrepreneur, you're a problem solver. You recognize certain deficiencies in the market, in the product, or the service. There may be a lack of availability of a certain product or a certain service. You may live in a a desert per se, where a certain service is not provided or is at a greater distance, especially living on the reservation. We have to travel hours on end, just to go grocery shopping. But from a cultural perspective, traditionally, we have a lot of roles that are instilled into us, that's expected of us, certain expectations to provide and to protect. I know a lot of different tribes may have that principle, may have those values where you have to provide and protect for your family. It may seem simple, two words, but in order to do that, you have to take certain approaches. There's certain activities that you have to do to provide and protect. Being hunters, being gatherers, being farmers, being fishers, or ranchers. What do you have to do to be a successful hunter? You have to know, where the game is at. How do you what makes you a successful gatherer? You have to know where the produce is at. You have to know the seasons, how they change. When does that fruit or those berries, you know, come ripe? How do you store it? Farming, what do you have to do to create, your crop, to take care of your crops? A lot of these principles have been passed down from generation to generation, and that allowed that family member, to be an entrepreneur in a sense where you have to go out and gather, what you need to provide for your family. You know where you have to go. You know how far, you have to travel in order to harvest your game, harvest, your produce and bring it back to your family. Along that route, you gain knowledge. You become familiar with the terrain. You become familiar, with your environment. You understand a lot of the dangers that are out there and how to navigate and be able to survive. I believe a lot of those principles and values translate a lot into entrepreneurship. You're usually out there all alone. The only people that are depending on you are your family, and they need you to come back, with your harvest, with your game, with your fish, or with your crops, and having to take care of your herds. That's what's going to sustain you and your family. And during that time, you're able to pass it on to your children, to your family, and that extends that network, I guess you can say, and it allows for the rest of your community, the rest of your tribe to be successful. A lot of times, people will tend to silo, you know, knowledge. That they will tend to silo, you know, their successes and not share it with others. But I believe the EBV Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans, we share the knowledge, we share other people's successes through our tribal liaisons, through other entrepreneurs that have struggled, that have overcome, those obstacles, and taught those participants, this is what happened to me. This is what I did to become successful. These are the resources that I've used. There's other opportunities out there. You don't have to go in this direction. You can redirect yourself, to allow you to become, successful and attain what your goal is. So that's where I kind of draw that correlation, with today's society and that entrepreneur venture with the traditional culture, cultural teachings.
Um, what was your favorite part of participating in the EBV, um, when you were a participant?
Lunch, lunch was great. No, seeing other Native American business owners that were successful, seeing, especially on probably a higher scale, I guess you could say a higher echelon, that you would not think, we were able to climb that ladder per se, but how everybody, had their humble beginnings. They started as an idea. What was my idea? I wanted to make something better. I talked about having a saturated market. you know Even our grandparents or our aunts, our uncles, were entrepreneurs in their own right, being food vendors or being jewelry vendors, um, providing the service for that product, without having the proper education, without having programs such as EBV. They were still successful. And like I said, they shared their knowledge with their children, with their grandchildren, and they're still continuing with that legacy. A lot of the liaisons or other tribal partners that presented during EBV had the same backgrounds, where they were taught by their parents or by their grandparents what it took for them to be successful, and they still carried and built upon that foundation to where they're at today. And it just showed, other tribal members, other Native American veterans, like, if they can do it, I can do it. Seeing is believing.
What's your favorite part of working with Hesperus?
My favorite part working with Hesperus is the engagement. Being in the community, uh, being with people that have, the same background, the same experience, especially with the Native American veterans. We know what it was like to be the only one, to be the only person in the group that had your identity. Nobody else to speak your language, nobody else that knew your culture, nobody else who knew why you do the things you do. Um, and also with the youth, tribal youth, leadership and development with them, being able to share your experience, with the next generation. Just like I said in our cultural principles, to provide and protect, you have to share your knowledge, with the future generation. And what Hesperus allows us to do is, even in the namesake of Hesperus, Hesperus is one of the four sacred mountains in the Navajo culture, and it's the actual mountain out there in southern Colorado. It's it's a very, very prominent mountain, but as you look at it, from one side you have to ascend to get to the summit, and that's your growth. That's you're struggling to get to the top of the summit. Once you get to the summit, you're able to see, these views, opportunities. There's a whole world out there. You look back, you see your struggles where you came from, and now you're going to be able to come down and descend back to your people, you know, the experience you've gained. I believe Hesperus has allowed us to do that. We taken other people's experience and shared it with those around us, so they can also uh, get to their summit and see what else is around them from their eyes, because we might not see things the same, and certain objects or certain views might mean something different to you than it does to me. But you're going to share that to your family, which allows you, to gain knowledge, share your knowledge, your wisdom, and continue on a legacy of success. So, reaching your summit, achieving your goals, and sharing your experience with those around you.
If like someone's listening to this and they're either a Native American veteran or they have like an auntie or an uncle or a cousin who's a veteran who they think, oh, they might be a good candidate for the Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans, what would you say to those people, like maybe considering applying to the program?
All right. Well, like we talked about, Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans, it's a specialized program, for our veterans here in the Southwest region, whichever tribe you come from, and it's offered at no cost. There's no cost associated with this. You don't have to use your GI Bill. You don't have to use your vocational rehab um, benefits to attend and to participate. Uh, a lot of the expenses are covered. The travel, the lodging, the meals. The only thing that it does cost you is your time and your efforts. And that's really on you. But the program is great. A lot of support, the structure, how it's laid out. It's really easy to navigate. It's really easy to accomplish. Phase one. Phase one does have the remote learning. Where you go through certain modules online, certain presentations that you have to complete before you're able to qualify and become eligible for phase two, which is the intensive residency portion. And that's in Albuquerque, where what I like about that is where it brings everybody together. During phase one, everything's remote. You're doing your courses online, and you don't really know who else is who in the program. You come to phase two, and you are introduced to other veterans, that just went through the same courses as you have, that either have the same business idea, same business plan or model, or something totally different, that's on a different in a different avenue, in a different direction than you are, but still you guys are experiencing the same difficulties, experiencing the same, um, how would you say, challenges, and you guys can share your experience with the other person's experience. How did they overcome it? What are you doing to make yourself better? How did you, or what other resources did you use? So I like that part about it being resourceful. The continuation of it, it's the areas that they cover, business feasibility, value creation, marketing, sales, financial planning. Uh, a lot of these questions, we don't ask ourselves, unless it's presented to us or unless we get ourselves into those certain situations. But with EBV, they present that to you, and everything's at no cost. But it is a boot camp. It's very intensive. You're gonna have a lot of presentations come to you in a single day. We're gonna get you out of your comfort zone. We're gonna see what what you can handle and what you cannot. But what I like about the EBV is everybody is so supportive. Everyone's there. Everybody wants you to succeed. Nobody wants you to fail. And even the other participants, will begin to coach you and will begin to support you even after that phase two is completed. So it's a great opportunity for any of our tribal veterans, our Native American veterans, um, to take advantage of.
And this year will be, we're launching applications at the beginning of May, I believe, right? We're gonna start advertising for that,
Yes.
I think. And then I think applications need to be in by sometime in July. I'll clarify that and I can put it in the description. I know it's sometime in July, but if you are interested in applying, you can reach out to myself or James. James typically handles the applications and inquiries from people interested. And so reach out to him. He'll send you a link with the application. And then the phase one is starting in August. And then phase two this year will be the week of September 21st. Like James said, it's an intensive 1 week thing, but I think people have really enjoyed it in the past. I'm currently gonna start working on the curriculum for phase two and inviting presenters. So, um, yeah, definitely reach out to either one of us if you're interested. Do you have any final thoughts or last words or things that you didn't get to say that you want to say while we're on here?
Oh, there's so many things that can be said. It basically just comes down to the individual, and what you want to achieve. If you're already an established business owner, the EBV will help you to continue to grow, continue to be successful. If you are new, you just have a thought of an idea of a business, of a product, of a service that you want to begin, EBV will help you lead in the right direction. And it's also not only for businesses. It can also be for a nonprofit organization. There's a lot of different principles that can apply during that time, in regards to innovation, feasibility, and, help you to develop a foundation of skills and abilities, for value creation. Like I said, marketing, sales, personal branding. So there's nothing but opportunity. There's nothing but space for you to grow, with the Entrepreneur Bootcamp for Native American veterans. I just want to thank, the University of New Mexico, Rainforest Innovations, for allowing us to continue to partner with Hesperus and to continue to reach out for our veterans throughout Indian country and also Alaska Natives. This is not just for the lower 48, but the Alaskan Natives and I believe Hawaiian Natives can be included in this.
Awesome. Well, thank you, James, for getting on here with me and sharing a little bit of your story and your insight as a veteran, as a participant in the Entrepreneur Bootcamp, and as someone working with Hesperus. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Cecilia.